The College of Natural and Health Sciences at the University of Wisconsin-Parkside presents Science Night.
Tonight's speaker is Dr. Greg Richards. He got his BS degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in microbiology with distinction, and his PhD also from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in microbiology. He did his postdoctoral experience at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, and his research interest is in bacterial responses to stress. So for tonight, Dr. Richard will be talking about zombie ants, vampire bacteria, and microscopic cannibals, the scary side of microbes.
Good evening. All right, thanks again, Daphne. Thanks for all of you for being here tonight, especially on such a lovely October evening. Tonight, we are going to be exploring 5 macabre and harrowing tales of horror on a microscopic scale. These tales are going to be chilling to all but the most deranged minds. You know, for example, like untenured professors, just for example. Tonight we're going to explore the ghastly side of microbes, the spooky side, the really downright nasty, and actually really terribly yucky. I mean really seriously, this is gonna get really gross, you guys. You are not going to believe there's gonna be so much brain eating in this talk, it is not even funny. So here are our 5 harrowing tales for the evening. We're gonna start with the zombie ants. We're gonna take a couple of side trips into zombie land. We're gonna talk about brain-eating protozoa, flesh-eating bacteria. Then we're gonna round the corner towards home with vampire bacteria, and we'll wrap up with our wee little microscopic cannibals. All right, before I get going, need to give you a little bit of a disclaimer. So all of the microbes that were chosen for tonight are often reported on by the mainstream popular media. You may have seen articles about them. So tonight we want to take a moment to look at these microbes and talk about how accurate these portrayals really are. So can microbes actually do these things? So the short answer is, unfortunately, for the most part, yes. But I'd like you to keep in mind that the ones we're going to talk about that infect humans are very rare, all right? If you happen to be at my science night last year, you know we talked about all the good things microbes do for us. They have a ton of benefits to us, and in fact, less than 1% of microbes out there actually cause disease. So that's my disclaimer. That said, tonight we're going to delve into the unseemly and seedy side of the 1%, all right? That was not at all a political reference. All right, so first up are our zombie ants. So yes, there really is a group of infectious fungi that turn ants into zombies. So this is work that is done by David Hughes at Penn State. He studies various species of Camponotus ants. These are carpenter ants, so example shown here. These are found all over the place. Wherever you find tropical weather, you'll find these guys. So an example is in the Thailand forests. You can even find them in the southern US. Generally, these ants live high up in the canopy, so way up in the trees. That's where they make their nests. You're going to find out why they like to do that in just a second. And one of the defining features of this group is they have this characteristic pronatal plate, so these little triangles sticking off the top side of their head. All right, so a little bit of background on our infectious zombie fungi. So these group of fungal species are of the particularly sinister sounding Orpheocordyceps unilateralis. That just doesn't sound nice, does it? These guys, this is a group of fungal species, so they do actually infect the ant. They grow inside the ant's head and brain. When the fungi grow inside the ant, they produce these characteristic stalks that spout from the corpse of the ant. So you can see a few examples of that here. sticking out the side of the ant. This is a nice close-up here, right outside the head. That's rough, isn't it? Nobody wants to go out that way. That's not good. So what these stalks are is they contain the reproductive spores of the fungi. All right, so the question at hand is, do the fungi really turn the ants into zombies? Well, after you hear about this, you can tell me. So the fungi do actually manipulate the behavior of the ant by altering its brain. And so the way that they alter the brain ends up altering the behavior of the ant. So the researchers that work on this in the Hughes lab, what they found is, this is a direct quote from them, they found that the ants that are infected by the fungi have a predictable stereotypical behaviors of random rather than directional walking, and also of repeated convulsions that make them fall down and precludes them from returning up to the canopy where their nests are. So what the fungus actually does to the ant is it does what they just described. So it causes the ant to descend from its nice happy nests up in the upper areas of the trees down into the understory or the ground vegetation, so all the plants on the ground. Now here's where it really starts to get kind of weird. So the fungus causes the ant to bite into the underside of a leaf, so in the understory, again, a plant on the ground. But the really weird part is that this always occurs on the northwest side of the plant, and it always occurs on or about solar noontime. So what the fungus makes the ant do is it causes the ant to bite down in what's called a final death grip. So once the ant bites down on this leaf, it's never going to open its jaws again. So a little more about this odd behavior, this death grip. So how this actually happens is the fungal cells that are growing inside the ant completely fill the ant's head and mandibles. So this is a section of the ant's head. Here are its mandibles or jaws, and here is where its mouth is located. I don't know how well you can see in the back, but these little blow-ups here show you that the fungi are growing all throughout the ant's head. So what this causes to happen is the muscles of the ant atrophy. So it's able to bite down, but it's too weak to open its mouth again. So this is how the ant is maintaining its grip on this leaf. So this little bottom picture here shows you normal, let's see, there we go, normal healthy muscle in the ant's head, in the jaw, and then here you see all this deterioration, all the white spaces are caused by the fungus being there. So once the ant expires, the fungus continues to grow inside the ant after it dies. And so that's the point at which the ant is, or the fungus is going to start to make its reproductive spores. So you may be asking yourself, dear Lord, why? Why would the fungi do this? Well, as with most things, what the organism gets out of this is food. So the fungus turns the ant's parts into sugars. So it breaks down parts inside the ant's head. It gets yummy, delicious food from it. But curiously, when it does this, it leaves those jaw muscles intact. So that's really important for this behavior of the death grip. Right, so researchers aren't exactly sure yet how the fungus makes the ant do this on this exact one corner of the plant, but the reason that the northwest corner of the plant is ideal is because it has the ideal temperature, humidity, and light for the fungus to grow and reproduce. So even though the ant bites down at solar noon, it typically dies at about sunset. So this is ideal for the fungus. It ensures that the fungus has a long, cool night. And in fact, it's the ideal conditions for this stalk to burst from the ant's head and then release its spores. And then the reproductive spores can be released in the night when there's less danger of them drying out compared to the day. So man, this is some pretty grim stuff, huh? Well, all hope is not lost for these poor ants here, okay? We're going to talk just a little bit quick about how exactly the fungus is able to do this. Again, it's not clear how it can be so specific. That's the creepy part about this. How is it able to get it to do this on one corner of the plant? But the good news here is that there is a cure for this. There is actually another fungus that preys on the zombie fungus. So this other fungus actually eats the zombie fungus, as the researchers call it, essentially castrating the zombie fungus. So what this means is only about 6.5% of the zombie spores are viable or able to reproduce. So in addition to that, the ants have a few defense mechanisms of their own. The healthy ants seem to avoid the infected zombie ants, and in fact, they have been known to push the zombie ants out of the canopy themselves so they fall on the floor. I mean, that may seem kind of harsh, but if you saw a zombie in your house, what are you going to do, right? Right, so there's another question that the researchers are looking at, which is they're wondering if the ants have adapted to living high up in the canopy because these spores are mostly found on the forest floor. And so despite what the researchers call this zombie ant graveyard, so when they go to look for these ants in the wild, in the jungles, they see that the forest floor is just littered with these corpses of the zombie ants. But the consequences clearly could be much worse because the ants up in the canopy are still surviving. All right, on to our next zombie microbe of the evening, brain-eating protozoan. Ooh, that's not good sounding, is it? No. All right, so this brain-eating protozoan definitely wins for most villainous moniker of the evening. It's called Naegleria fowleri, right? So you'll often hear if you've heard about this in the mainstream news, you may have heard it referred to as a brain-eating amoeba. So in fact, that's not at all accurate. So Naegleria fowleri isn't an amoeba at all. It's a protozoan, in fact. So what a protozoa are they're a huge general group of eukaryotic microbes. So they're such a big group that they include both the amoebae and Naegleria fowleri. But the fact of the matter is, Naegleria is not even it's very distantly related, rather, to the amoeba. In fact, N. fowleri is not even found in the same phylum as amoebae. So to give you a kind of analogy of what that means, saying that N. fowleri is an amoeba is saying, for example, a fluke worm is a human because they're both animals. Oh my, who's that handsome devil up there? When you're giving the talk, you can put your own picture up there. But I mean, you guys get the idea, right? This is crazy. These are totally different organisms. I hope you can see that. I mean, it's not like we ever see like fluke human hybrids in real life, is there? I mean, Okay, X-Files aside, you generally don't kind of see that kind of thing, right? All right, you get the idea though. They're not remotely related, okay? So you may be wondering, does Naegleria fowleri really eat brains? The short version is, yeah, it does. To which your next query may possibly be, does it eat human brains? You betcha. So Naegleria is normally found in nature, not associated with humans. Normally it's found in the soil, it's found in freshwater runoff. So essentially if soil runs off into natural bodies of water during rain, you'll find Naegleria in there. So in other words, in warm, soil-contaminated bodies of water in the summer. So examples of that, hot springs, warm lakes and streams, that kind of thing. Now, normally, Naegleria out in nature will feed on bacteria and other microbes. In fact, it also will feed on other amoebae, various organic debris. Humans are not its preferred food. All right, so speaking of how it feeds, do you have any guesses what these holes are on here? Any guesses at all? These are what Naegleria uses to eat brains, these little holes. So this is actually 3 different Naegleria here. Here they are. And they are tearing an amoeba a new one. They are ripping it apart right here. Right? So they have these sucker-like feeding structures that are pulling it apart. Right? That just doesn't even seem fair, ganging up like that. All right, so if you've taken intro bio or if you've had micro, this is what's referred to as phagocytic feeding. So these guys are swallowing parts of these organisms whole. So how exactly does Naegleria do this? Well, it actually can enter the human brain directly through the nose. More specifically, it travels up the olfactory nerve. Now, the slightly good part about this is it can't infect people through the mouth. So what that means is, essentially, it's safe to drink. You would have to get one directly up your nose to get infected. The disease that Naegleria causes is called meningoencephalitis. It's as bad as it sounds. It involves extensive brain hemorrhaging or bleeding and destruction of brain tissue. Usually how people get this is from swimming in warm, stagnant, natural bodies of water late in the summer. So again, often if there's been soil runoff into the lake, so a shallow pond, lake, or stream. But in addition to that source of infection, there's one especially curious source of infection. Right, so a couple of years ago, there were 2 lethal cases of this in Louisiana due to improper use of neti pots. So just quick show of hands, how many of you know what neti pots are? All right, there's kind of a mix of people, so I'll go over it. It is this thing here, kind of looks like a teapot, but you don't want to confuse it with your teapot. So how this works is when you have a cold or the flu, if you got a lot of congestion, you put some water with salts in it, you stick it up your nose, pour it in one nostril, the fluid comes out the other, and out comes all sorts of yummy, delicious, mucousy, possibly rainbow-colored congestion, right? So that's how this works. The problem with Naegleria and neti pots is Naegleria is occasionally found in water heaters and tap water. Side note on that, your tap water is very clean, but it's not entirely sterile. So you may have gone through a case where there was a boiling advisory issued in your city where you're supposed to sterilize your water before using it for cooking and cleaning. So these 2 patients, it really was a tragic situation, were infected by using contaminated tap water directly in their neti pots. So the bottom line with this is if you do use a neti pot, please sterilize the water and also, or alternately use bottled and distilled water. And then the other thing is you want to rinse it out and dry it out in between uses because they could be living inside your neti pot. All right. So just how deadly is this guy? Well, very. So just in 4 years from 99 to 2003, there were only 12 cases of this, but all of them were fatal. But so this may point you to the fact that thankfully, even though this is a really fatal disease, it's very, very rare. Okay, it infects only about 0 to 8 people per year in the US. And in fact, in 50 years from 1962 to 2012, there were only 128 cases of Naegleria infection in the US. So it is very rare. Now, the problem, though, is that it is very fatal. Of all those 128, only 2 patients survived. So this, again, by the way, is a colored micrograph of this guy. The yellow guy here is Naegleria. It's in animal tissue. This is a blood vessel here. The little red blobs are red blood cells. Little light blue blobs are white blood cells. All right, so if you look at the distribution of N. fowleri, again, it's extremely rare. And I think of probably most immediate interest to this audience is going to be there's never been a case in Wisconsin, right? So it's very rare outside of the southern United States. So the reason for this is that, again, these warm, stagnant natural bodies of water, that kind of temperature tends to happen in the south. So there's a very low risk if you avoid swimming in shallow, warm, fresh water in the summer, especially in the south. And then again, this guy likes to live in soil, so it's especially important not to stir up the bottom sediments in the lake or pond. Also, let's just take, what's going on with Texas and Florida here, huh? That's just crazy. Let's just not go there late in the summer. Actually, what the problem with those 2, the reason why there's more cases there, if you can't read it, it's over 10 cases per state, but they have a much higher population than the other states in the south. That's why. All right, so kind of looking at all of the cases of this over those 50 years, you can kind of see a trend. This is the number of case reports in those 50 years per month, all right? So there's probably something that sticks out. Here is that most of the cases are happening, again, in the warm months of the summer, July, August, maybe September. And most of the cases are happening from swimming in lakes and ponds in the warm months. So the purple here, the big purple thing is lakes, ponds, and reservoirs. And then if you add to that the light purple, which is canals, ditches, and puddles. I don't know many people who go swimming in puddles, but whatever. And then you have to be really tiny, right? Okay, anyway. And then the red there is rivers and streams. And then in addition to that, even though the neti pot thing is scary, of all those cases in 50 years, there have only been 6 cases of what the Centers for Disease Control technically calls tap water forced up the nose. So that is, they're talking about the neti pot when they talk about that. All right, so that's again kind of grim, so we're going to end on a little happier note. There was a third survival case just this summer, actually. There was a 12-year-old girl who got infected, but she survived. And she's actually was headed back to school this fall, so that's great. They think again that she contracted it from swimming in warm water that had Naegleria in it in the summer. So this may lead you to wonder, well, what was special about these 3 cases out of 128? What exactly is the key to survival? Well, there's several factors that go into it. That's a combination of luck, detecting the disease early, and the drug treatment being administered early. So really the early detection is the key to this, diagnosing it early so that it can be treated right away before Naegleria has a chance to eat the brain. The problem with this is that the symptoms can be nondescript, so it's not like there's any magical symptom where you're like, oh, I have a brain-eating protozoan in my head, right? You kind of feel generally sick, kind of flu-like symptoms initially. So the girl that survived, her mom actually took her to the hospital very quickly, was worried about her, and they were able to properly diagnose it. And then in addition, they just administered a ton of different drugs. So there's an antifungal drug, they administered antibiotics, and also a new experimental anti-amoeba drug from the Centers for Disease Control. So this seems to be about the best drug available for treating this. If you've taken micro or intro bio, you may be wondering why they're using antibiotics, which work on bacteria, to treat a eukaryotic microbe disease. Well, the reason for this is that, remember, some of the organelles that are inside eukaryotic microbes are descended from bacteria. So those antibiotics are targeting the organelles of the Naegleria. Another thing they did that proved extremely useful in this particular case is they lowered the body temperature to 93 degrees. So what this is often done in cases of brain injury, so it just can kind of slow down the system and kind of prevent further damage from happening. Finally, another factor in survival seems to be, at least in the previous 2 cases, that the particular strain or type of Naegleria was a weaker strain, so it wasn't as good at causing disease, so the disease happened more slowly. That can also play a role. Okay, so that's kind of ending on a happy note. Only I lied. We're going to end on one more horrible thing, all right? So remember those feeding structures I talked about with Naegleria? Guess what? Those 3 feeding structures look like a creepy clown face. OMG, that's so awful. Look at that. Why? Why does it have to look like that on top of making this horrible disease where it eats your brain? Look how creepy that is. Ugh. Okay. All right, so on to our final zombie-ish microbe of the evening, flesh-eating bacteria. So as far as I'm concerned, this is definitely one of the scariest things that bacteria do. But as we're going to see in a minute, they don't actually eat flesh. All they do is really just destroy all your tissue with toxins. So that's not so bad, right? All right, so again, they don't actually eat flesh. What they do is destroy tissue. So that's another example of, you may hear about this in the media, but it's not accurate, right? Now, the bacteria that do this have to have an extra special toxin that allows them to destroy tissues. So that what this means is this is not all that common. And a lot of the types of, or strains of the bacteria that do this are lacking that toxin, so they're not able to cause this kind of disease. So more medically and scientifically, what this disease actually is called is necrotizing fasciitis. So what that means is you're infecting the fascia, which is a membranous layer of connective tissue, and necrotizing means tissue death. All right, so how this disease typically progresses is bacteria get in through a break in the skin, like a cut, a wound, that kind of thing. Again, with this one, the initial symptoms may be vague. So people will report just having the wound or the cut that they have feels sore, maybe more sore than usual, or it may feel like they have a pulled muscle. One of the scary things about this is how rapidly it can proceed. So the infection may proceed very rapidly from the surface into the underlying muscle, and that can occur in as little as a few hours. If this remains untreated, it can lead to shock and also death. So because this is such a fast disease, the key to survival in this case is early detection. Again, one of the big symptoms that is often seen is that you may feel more pain than you would normally expect from a small cut. You may also start to see purple or black spots or extra dark red spots forming. So that can mean that's the start of the tissue being destroyed. That's the necrotizing behavior. So if doctors hear of any symptoms like this, they should treat it as if it might be this kind of thing, just to be on the safe side. Better safe than sorry, because it progresses so quickly. All right, so I promised to many people that I would show this, but now is the time to avert your eyes. If you are squeamish, this is going to be a little gruesome, so if you're easily grossed out, don't look, right? Okay, so here is a person's foot that has this, yeah, it gets eaten away pretty quickly. Let's not linger on that. Okay. So again, there is some good news in this case, right? The good news is, like with Maclaria, this is extremely rare. So it's especially extremely rare among healthy people and those with good hygiene. So take-home message, wash your cuts if you get one already. Slap a Band-Aid on that, okay? So it is very rare. There's only 650 to 800 cases per year in the U.S. Now you may be saying, hey, that sounds like a lot compared to Maclaria, where there was only like 100 or so in 50 years. Well, according to the National Institutes of Health, a rare disease is defined as less than 200,000 cases per year. So when you compare it to that, this is really an extremely rare thing. You still have a better chance of winning the lottery or getting struck by lightning. I didn't look up those statistics. I'm just guessing. It's really rare. So it is most commonly found. Most of these cases, again, are not in healthy individuals. They're commonly found in people that have weakened immune systems. So these may be people that are already in the hospital with something else, particularly an open wound if it is not kept clean and sterile. In addition, other risk factors include having other diseases that tax your immune system, so things like diabetes, kidney disease, cancer, that kind of thing. Again, another piece of good news is that the main cause of this disease responds really well to antibiotic treatment. Generally, they'll give a broad spectrum antibiotic just in case there are other bacteria involved before the diagnosis has been made. And then in addition, there's usually got to be surgery, aggressive surgery, to remove the dead tissue. So if you can get rid of the microbe even being there, that's a good way to prevent it from spreading further. All right, so what exactly causes this disease? The main cause is Streptococcus pyogenes, more specifically a type of this bacterium called group A strep. So this is the guy I'm showing you here. It's the most common cause, but it's also caused by Staphylococcus aureus. You may have heard of that as MRSA. Also, E. coli is a rare cause of it. There are a few others as well. So in order to cause this disease, Streptococcus needs to, again, have this special toxin. This toxin is called exotoxin A. This is what does the majority of the tissue destruction. Exotoxin A is what's called a super antigen. So what that means is it actually overstimulates the human immune system, and the human immune system actually contributes to this damage to the tissue that's happening. So your immune system is great, and it gets rid of infecting microbes that cause disease, but some of the ways in which it does that are producing toxic chemicals that will get rid of the microbes. So if you turn on the immune system too much, it can lead to collateral damage. All right, and again, not all strains or types of Streptococcus pyogenes have this toxin. In fact, it's a very rare percentage that have this toxin. So in fact, about 5 to 15% of people actually carry Streptococcus pyogenes as a normal part of their microbes found in their throat. And in addition to that, Streptococcus pyogenes causes a variety of other diseases where there's no risk of this necrotizing fasciitis happening. So what else does Streptococcus pyogenes cause? Well, I'm going to tell you, as far as I'm concerned, it's probably the arch villain of bacteria that cause diseases. It causes, like, for example, strep throat. You might have guessed that from the name Streptococcus, right? Causes other localized skin infections, especially, again, in healthy people. If you have good hygiene, that can be the difference between getting a localized infection and something more serious. It also is a cause of earaches, not a major cause, but it does cause them. It causes meningitis. It's also the cause of scarlet fever, rheumatic fever, toxic shock syndrome that's often associated with necrotizing fasciitis. So hopefully you agree with me. It really is an arch villain among bacteria. All right, so how is it that Streptococcus can do all this? Why is it so good at causing so many different diseases? Well, it has a lot of what are called virulence factors. So these are different tools and tricks that the bacterium has up its metaphorical sleeve that help it cause disease. So an example of this is a protein called M protein. This is found on the surface of the microbe. Here's a Streptococcus cell that has these little M proteins on the surface. What it helps it do is get a foothold in a person. So it grabs onto human cells really well, and it also helps it avoid the immune response of people. In addition, it has a bunch of these toxins and enzymes that will destroy cells and tissues. So for example, it has one called beta-hemolysin that can actually kill and break open your red blood cells. It has one called leukocidin that destroys white blood cells. And another one, streptolysin, also kills red blood cells. So you get it. There's a variety of toxins and enzymes here. And what they tend to do is they help it degrade its infecting organism like a human. It helps it degrade its cells and tissue. And in fact, some of the toxins are specific to the different diseases it causes, just like the exotoxin A we talked about. So a little bit about these other diseases that Streptococcus causes. One of them is called erysipelas. So this is an infection of the dermis, which is below the upper epidermis layer of the skin. It creates these characteristic red patches, raised margins kind of thing. Another thing it causes is otitis media. So again, those are infections of the middle ear, or what we commonly call earaches. So probably at one point or another, most of you have had this. 85% of kids under the age of 3 have had an ear infection. Now again, it's not, Streptococcus isn't one of the most common causes, but it is a cause. And again, as we mentioned, it also causes strep throat, which is known as pharyngitis. Right, a little bit about strep throat. If you've had it, you know it's not very pleasant. It's an infection of the upper respiratory tract. It can cause local severe inflammation and fever, so a lot of times the throat will really hurt a lot from that. In addition, there may be inflammation of the tonsils or tonsillitis that accompanies this. So with that, you can get these characteristic white pus-filled lesions. So side note, pyogenes means pus forming. Delicious. All right, so in addition, you may know that if you get coughed or sneezed on, you can get this from someone that's infected because it's transmitted by respiratory secretions. In addition to that, there's another kind of really important thing going on in our country with strep throat. It's really become something of an epidemic that is affecting our nation's rock and roll artists. They're particularly susceptible. Gene Simmons got it. Frankenfurter got it. All of the Rolling Stones got it. I'm pretty sure about that. All right. A little bit more about strep throat. So people can carry it, but actually dogs and some other pets are also carriers of Streptococcus pyogenes. Little side note though, the majority of patients with sore throat don't actually have strep throat, all right? So it's not that terribly common. There are a lot of other bacteria and also viruses that cause sore throats. In the case of viruses, antibiotics are useless for treating them. So it's really hard to actually diagnose strep throat because the presence of the group A streptococci doesn't mean that it's the cause, because again, some people just have it living inside their throat anyway. The good news though is that with treatment, most of the group A strep are still sensitive to first-line drugs like penicillin. All right, so in addition, again, we're not even done yet. Streptococcus also causes scarlet and rheumatic fever. So scarlet fever can actually be a complication that arises from strep throat, particularly if the strep throat isn't properly treated. So this is an example where group A strep will only cause this disease if it has a special toxin. So this toxin is called erythrogenic, which means reddening toxin. So you get these characteristic pinkish skin rash, like this very happy young guy here. You also get a spotted tongue. It leads to high fever and aches. So even when people get scarlet fever today, it tends to be much rarer than it used to be. And it's much more easily treatable again because we have antibiotics. And finally, one of the other worst complications of having a streptococcal infection is rheumatic fever. So this is when you get systemic inflammation of organs, joints, even the brain. So this again can result from untreated pharyngitis or from scarlet fever. Now thankfully with our modern drug treatments, this has become really rare in the US, but sadly it's still a serious source of child heart disease in developing countries where they don't have access to all the treatments that we do. All right, so we're done with our zombies for the evening. We're rounding the corner towards home. We're going to go with our vampire bacteria. I'm going to tell you, are these bacteria really vampires? You may be wondering, well, I think they are. I mean, especially relatively speaking, unlike certain other vampires, these actually exhibit some characteristics typically associated with vampires. They don't just act all grumpy and emo and sparkle in the sun, okay? These actually do some vampire-y kind of things. All right, so our vampire bacterium is Microscopic Cannibals. That definitely wins for worst horrible long name of the evening. So, Microscopic typically inhabits wastewater, so it'll be found in the water that is associated with sewage treatment plants. It's actually been known about for over 30 years, but there's very little known about it. Why? And why is that? Well, like most vampires, it has a very sneaky and solitary lifestyle. In particular, it's really hard to grow it and study it in the lab. So is Microscopic really a vampire? Well, you tell me. Its hobbies include moonlight walks and spend a lot of its time tracking, hunting, and feeding on other bacteria. It doesn't simply eat dead food and nutrients like a lot of organisms. In fact, it diabolically is able to attach to other cells, and it does, in fact, suck out or leach nutrients from its prey. So here's an example. This tiny little gold-colored guy here is the microvibrio that's attached to a larger cell that it's preying upon. That's not entirely clear. Here's the business end, right there. Right? So the problem with trying to study this guy is it can't survive if you just give it a bunch of nutrients. It doesn't have the ability to eat them. It really does need to leech on its prey, suck the nutrients out to survive. So in other words, yes, it's true, Microscopic survives by drinking other bacteria's milkshake. It drinks it up, all right? It's too obscure. Not all the jokes can be winners, okay? Just go Google it. Google the milkshake thing when you get home. You'll think it's hilarious. Okay, anyway. All right. So how does Microscopic actually do this? Well, since it is difficult to grow and study in the lab, what researchers did is sequence its genome. All right, so what they found by looking at all of its DNA, which is its genome, is that it has a ton of genes that help it to swim. So it helps it to move its flagellum, which is its tail. And in addition, it has a lot of genes that encode products that allow it to detect different chemical signatures of its prey cells that it is hunting and tracking. When the bacterium goes into its leaching mode, where it's stealing nutrients from the host, it makes a bunch of proteins that help it to attach to its prey cell and build a bridge to it, and that also help it digest its prey. All right, so kind of this ability to kill other microbes has led to interest in using Mica vibrio to treat human diseases. So why is that? Well, some of the bacteria that it targets are able to cause disease in humans. So if we could possibly use Mica vibrio to get rid of these disease-causing microbes, that would be a good thing. In fact, our horrible name, Aeruginosaurus, this actually means Aeruginosa eating. So what that means is, one of the examples of bacteria that Mica vibrio eats is Pseudomonas aeruginosa. So this is in fact the bacterium that infects the lungs of people who have cystic fibrosis and makes them sick. So that's just an example. So the idea is that Mica vibrio could possibly be used someday as an alternative to antibiotics, or especially for bacteria that are resistant to our current drug treatment. All right, on to our last microbe for the evening, cannibalistic bacteria. But just very quickly before we do that, OMG, remember this guy? How creepy is that? It looks like a creepy clown face. It's awful. Okay, done with that. Cannibalistic bacteria is called Bdellovibrio. It's found all over the place, just like some of these other guys you've seen. Particularly like Maclaria, it's found in soil and in natural bodies of water. Now, unlike Mica vibrio, this has actually been studied in the lab for years, and the reason for that is that unlike Mica vibrio, Bdellovibrio can be grown, some of the species can be grown in the lab without their prey bacteria. You can give them a ton of other nutrients, they're able to grow. That said, it's easier for them to grow on their prey, so all you do is put their prey cells on a plate and then put Bdellovibrio on it. It's able to grow very happily. Right, so Bdellovibrio cells look like this. They're a small motile, which means they can swim, so they use this flagella or tail again, and they have this typical curved shape here. So are these guys really cannibals? Well, like Mica vibrio, they prey on other bacteria. Okay, in fact, Bdella means leech. Now, unlike Mica vibrio, which attaches on and sucks the nutrients out of its prey, Bdellovibrio is not content doing that. Instead, it actually invades into the prey cell to directly get its nutrients, and it also reproduces while it's there. Again, just to orient you here, again, this kind of tan-colored guy is the Bdellovibrio, the blue guy is its prey cell. Here's where it's attaching and invading. All right, so is this really a cannibal? Well, probably not in the strictest sense of the word. It doesn't eat its own species, but it does eat related gram-negative bacteria. So a little bit more about how it does this. It attaches to the prey and it penetrates into the prey cell wall, and then once it gets inside, it gets its nutrients and it reproduces. So here are some cross sections. The big cell here is the prey cell. This small darker oval is Bdellovibrio invading. And then here on the side is Bdellovibrio living inside of its prey cell. Again, it takes nutrients directly from the host and kills it. So just to see this in a little more schematic way, the way this works is that, again, it's going to first attach to its prey cell here and then enter it. Once it enters it, it forms a special structure in the space beneath the cell wall here. That structure is called the Bdelloplast. And while it's there, it's going to steal nutrients, and then it kind of elongates into this long characteristic shape, and then it's going to reproduce while it's there. So this long cell is going to split into a bunch of different cells. So about 2 to 4 hours after that, the prey cell is going to lyse or explode open, and then it's going to release the Bdellovibrio progeny, which can go on to infect other cells. So what exactly does Bdellovibrio eat while it's in here? Well, it eats the building blocks of life. So it eats nucleotides, which make up its prey cell's DNA and RNA. It eats fatty acids, which make up the cell's fats and lipids. It eats amino acids and peptides, which building blocks of proteins. It also can eat some larger nutrients like whole protein. So how exactly does Bdellovibrio do this? Well, to get an idea, scientists again sequenced its entire DNA, all of its DNA, its genome. What they found is that it's missing the abilities a lot of bacteria have to make its own nutrients and some of these building blocks I just mentioned. So instead, it has this huge part of its genome that is called the protozoan. So in other words, predator genome. About 40% of its DNA are tools that are dedicated to killing and digesting its prey. A lot of these genes involve chewing up parts of its prey cells. So it has 20 DNases, which are enzymes that chew up DNA, 9 RNases, 15 lipases, which chew up lipids, so on and so forth. To give you a kind of comparison, a typical bacterium like E. coli might have, say, 3 DNases, 2 lipases, something like that. All right, so what does Bdellovibrio infect? Well, again, it infects related bacteria, not the same species, but other gram-negatives. So those include these guys. So you may recognize a few of these, like Escherichia coli, Salmonella. These are common causes of gastrointestinal disease. Helicobacter pylori is the causative agent of ulcers. And in fact, also Erwinia here is a common pathogen of plants. So many of these guys that it's able to infect and kill are human and plant pathogens. So you may see where I'm going with this, just like with Microscopic Cannibals. It may have the potential to weaponize it and use it to treat some bacterial diseases, particularly drug-resistant ones. And the nice thing about this is it does not target other groups of bacteria, and it doesn't target human cells. So it's pretty specific to these microbes. So it might have potential medical or agricultural uses. All right, so in sum, we just spent all this time talking about horrible microbes, but don't forget only a small number of them cause disease. That said, some of the ones that do are really terribly awfully scary. All right, so again, research on some of these microbes that do cause disease in humans can help us figure out how to stop them from causing disease. And then finally, research on these microbes that are predators of other microbes could mean new treatments for human diseases. So with that, I'd like to just thank New York Times, our other sponsors of Science Night, UW Parkside for hosting Science Night, and you guys for listening. If you have any questions.